Imagine being able to look at someone and know if he is telling the truth or a lie. The FBI trains its agents to detect invisible signals. And today, I'm going to show you some of the most effective. The language that no one sees. Imagine this. You enter a room full of mirrors. You don't know anyone. No one knows you. The atmosphere is silent. Conversations float in the air, and each person seems to concentrated in her own world. However, in less than 5 seconds, something curious happens. Your mind begins to notice small details. Someone seems uncomfortable. Another person dominates the conversation without raising his or her voice. And in a corner, someone looks like ready to leave even before the meeting. Finish is not luck. And it's definitely not magic. It's simply the ability to observe what most people are unaware of. For decades, the findings of the FBI's behavior have been trained to master a skill that seems almost supernatural to the rest of the world. Read people without the need to hear a single word. Before anyone answers a question, before you make an excuse or a lie, carefully crafted. His body has already revealed what actually is happening in your mind. The reason is simple. The human being has 2 systems that govern its behavior. The first is the conscious system, the rational part of the mind that uses words, arguments and explanations to build a logical version of reality. This system can lie, can manipulate, and can invent stories with surprising ease. But there is another much older and more powerful system. The limbic system. The limbic system is the center of emotions and instincts. Is the part of the brain that is activated when we feel fear, attraction, discomfort, or safety. And most important of all, is that this system does not know how to lie, is not designed to make excuses, nor to create convincing speeches. Just reacts. When someone feels threatened, your body reacts. When someone feels interest or moves their body, also reacts. These answers occur in milliseconds of a second, long before the mind rational have time to intervene. So, for experts in human behavior, body language becomes a direct window into the mind. But here comes a curious problem. Most people spends his whole life looking at others without really observing them. We concentrate on words, in facial expressions, in the stories they tell us. However, we ignore the most honest signs of the human body. Small signals, subtle but incredibly revealing. Among all these signs, there is one that FBI specialists consider one of the most reliable. Intensively is also the part of the body that almost no one observes. The feet. From an evolutionary point of view, feet have always been our main survival mechanism. For thousands of years, when our ancestors were detecting a danger, did not have time to analyze the situation, the body reacted automatically. Feet were getting ready to run. This answer continues to exist in modern humans, even if we no longer live surrounded by predators. In nature, today when a person feels uncomfortable in a conversation, when you want to end an interaction, or when you want to leave a place, your conscious mind can try to disguise it with words, can smile, can nod, can feign interest. But their feet often reveal the truth. When someone feels interested and committed to a conversation, their feet usually point towards the person with whom he is talking, is an unconscious sign of attention. The brain is saying, I want to stay here. However, when the mind begins to lose interest, or when discomfort appears, feet begin to orient in another direction. Maybe towards the door, perhaps to someone else in the room, perhaps in any direction, representing a possible exit. For behavioral analysts, this is a sign of intention. The body is indicating where it wants to go. Actually, address. FBI agents use this observation frequently during meetings, interviews, or interrogations. Before hearing an answer, observe the orientation of the body. Observe the direction of the feet, and many times, that little clue reveals much more than the words, "to come next." Even at social meetings, this signal can reveal invisible dynamics. If you look closely at a group of people, by talking, you will notice something interesting. Most people's feet tend to be oriented towards the person that generates more interest or influence within the group. Not necessarily to the one who speaks loudest, but towards those with the greatest psychological presence. This insignificant detail can reveal who has the real leadership in a room. But this technique is not only used to analyze others, it can also change the shape in which you interact with the world. Imagine you are talking to someone and you notice that his feet begin to orient themselves towards the exit. The most common reaction would be to try to prolong the conversation, add more words, or try to regain their attention. However, behavioral experts recommend exactly the opposite. When you detect this signal, end the conversation first. Do it calmly and naturally, even with a simple smile. "I don't want to take any more time away from you," may be sufficient. This small gesture changes completely the psychological dynamics of the interaction. Instead of looking like someone looking for desperately the approval of others, project security and control. Unfortunately, many times, this type of behavior has the effect of opposite to expected. The other person is more interested. What the FBI guys discovered through modern psychology is something that the Stoic philosophers already sensed. More than 2,000 years ago, the Stoics believed that in order to understand truly to people, we were not to concentrate solely on his words, but in their actions and expressions. Marco Aurelio wrote in his Meditations that the character of a person is revealed in the small moments, in those gestures that occur when no one is trying to impress others. To observe without judgment then becomes a form of knowledge. And the more you observe, the more you begin to understand a fundamental truth about human nature. People can construct elaborate discourses, can hide their emotions behind curtains, or convincing arguments. But his body is always communicating something deeper. The art of reading people begins precisely there, in learning to see what has always been in front of us, but that almost no one stops to observe. And the most interesting is that the feet are just the beginning. Because when the human brain feels uncomfortable, threatened, or unsafe, the body produces a series of signals, even more evident signs that professional interrogators know very well. And once you learn to recognize them, you will begin to see them everywhere. If you are discovering things you've never noticed before on human behavior, this is the perfect time to support the channel. Subscribe to Stoic Foundation, activate the bell, and leave a like. This channel exists to explore how modern psychology, ancient philosophy, and practical knowledge can help you understand the world better and to dominate your own mind. Because the next signal we are going to analyze is one of the favorites of professional interrogators. and you've probably seen it hundreds of times already. Without realizing it, body blockage, the silent sign of discomfort. Once you begin to observe people's feet, you discover something interesting. The human body rarely sends a single signal, usually sends several at the same time. The findings of the FBI's behavior call these behavioral clusters, i.e., groups of signals pointing to the same emotional state. When several signs appear together, reading becomes much more reliable. And among all those signs, there is one that is common. When someone feels uncomfortable, insecure, or threatened is called body blockage. Body blockage is an instinctive response that has its origin in our oldest survival mechanisms. When the brain perceives a threat, even if socially or psychologically active, a set of behaviors designed to protect the body. It's not always about running or attacking. Often the body simply tries to create a barrier. That is why, when a person begins to feel uncomfortable in a conversation, your body usually places objects or parts of one's own body between her and the source of that discomfort. Maybe cross your arms, maybe put a cup of coffee, a notebook or phone right in front of his cell phone. May slightly tilt the torso to one side, avoiding looking completely in front of the other person. These actions seem insignificant, but for a trained observer, can reveal a very important emotional change. Imagine a business negotiation. At the beginning, both people have a relaxed conversation. Their positions are open, arms rest naturally. And the atmosphere seems comfortable, though. At the moment, a sensitive issue appears. Perhaps the price of an agreement or an uncomfortable condition changes something. The other person crosses his arms, says nothing. No protest, no contradict, no. But his body has just sent a very clear message. Something in this conversation causes him discomfort. For FBI heroes, that moment is extremely valuable. Not because it means that the person is lying, but because it reveals exactly what part of the conversation activated an emotional reaction. In other words, the body has just pointed out a point. Sensible professional interrogators use this type of signals to adjust its strategy. Instead of pressing directly, can change the focus, modify the question, or enter a pause. Often that little body reaction contains more information than a whole verbal explanation. However, there is something very important that you must understand. A single gesture means nothing by itself. People cross their arms for many reasons. Maybe they are cold. Maybe they are just comfortable like this. That's why experts never intervene in a single signal. Always look for patterns. If a person crosses his or her arms, push the torso away, and also orients his feet to the other side, then we are seeing a cluster of discomfort. 3 signs pointing to the same emotion. That's when reading begins to be reliable. Unfortunately, human beings, we also use another type of lock, which is even more subtle. Blocking with objects. Sees what is happening in many conversations, informal. When someone feels completely comfortable, the objects in his hands often disappear from the interaction. Hands become visible, open and relaxed. But when discomfort appears, something changes. The person holds the phone with both hands, places a glass right in front of his chest, holds a folder or bag against your body. In Malaga, it is a casual gesture. But from the point of view of human behavior, that object has become a small psychological. The body is unconsciously saying, I need to protect myself. In the FBI interrogations, This type of behavior is observed with great attention, not because they indicate guilt directly, but because they indicate moments of emotional tension. And those moments usually appear right after certain questions. When a question generates discomfort, the body responds before the person have time to think of an answer. That small interval between question and answer is one of the most important moments, revealing of human behavior. At that instant, the mind, conscious, has not yet constructed an explanation. The limbic system has already reacted. Experts call this phenomenon emotional flight. Is an automatic reaction that occurs before the person managed to control their behavior. And once you know how to detect it, you begin to see it with surprising frequency. However, the behavioral analysis is not just about observing when discomfort appears, also consists of observing when it disappears. This detail is extremely important. Imagine a person starting a conversation with arms crossed and the female body tilted backwards. Their position indicates a certain reserve or distrust. But as the conversation progresses, something changes. Your arms relax. Your hands become visible. His torso leans slightly forward. This change of position reveals something very powerful. The person has just gone from a state of discomfort to a state of confidence. For professional negotiators at that time, is a clear sign of progress. It means that the conversation is moving in the right direction satisfactorily. There is a technique that can accelerate this process. Is called behavioral training. Human beings, we have a natural tendency to imitate unconsciously people's behavior with which we feel connected. When two people begin to synchronize their postures, their gestures, or their rhythm of conversation, a sense of familiarity is produced. That is why some interrogators and negotiators use body contour in a very subtle way. If the other person has a closed posture, they adopt a position, similar response for a few seconds, then gradually begin to open their position. In many cases, the other person follows this change unconsciously. The result is a growing sense of comfort. The interesting is that this modern technique of social psychology has a striking echo in Stoic philosophy. The Stoics did not speak of body language, nor behavioral analysis, but they did insist on a fundamental idea: self-control. Epictetus taught that we cannot control the actions of others, but we can control our own answers. By keeping calm, openness, and emotional stability, often we influence each other in the behavior of those around us. In other words, self-control can become in a silent form of leadership. When you maintain an open posture, a calm presence, and a serene attitude, you send a powerful psychological signal. You do not pose a threat. And when people no longer feel threatened, your body also begins to relax. This simple principle explains why some leaders, negotiators, or interrogators seem to have such a calm and dominant presence. At the same time, it is not about intimidation, it's about stability. And this stability has a direct effect on human behavior. But there is still another sign, body, that FBI experts consider one of the most revealing of all, a sign that appears when the brain is experiencing a level, unfortunately, elevated stress or anxiety. Almost nobody watches her, however. Once you discover it, it becomes impossible to stop watching it. Or the next signal, when the body tries to calm the mind, At this point, you know something that most people never discovers. The human body is always communicating something. Feet reveal intention. Body blockage reveals discomfort. But there is another, even more interesting sign. A sign that appears when the human brain experiences stress, anxiety, or internal conflict. The findings of the FBI's behavior know her very well, and unfortunately, almost no one watches over her for years. Interrogation experts observed something repeated again and again. Every time a question generated psychological pressure, in a mirror, a small, almost imperceptible gesture appeared. The person was touching his neck, sometimes placed his hand on the base of the neck. Sometimes I would rub that area lightly, other times he adjusted the collar of the shirt or played with a necklace. At first glance, it seemed like an unimportant gesture, but when researchers began to analyze it in greater depth, discovered something similar. The neck area, specifically the small gap between the collarbones, known as the suprasternal fossa, is one of the most sensitive areas of the human body. When we experience stress, when a person feels emotionally threatened, the nervous system activates a response. Automatic to regulate voltage, the body tries to calm itself, and one of the most common ways to do so is touching or protecting that vulnerable area. This behavior is what specialists call peacemaking gesture, a gesture that the body uses to reduce anxiety. The interesting thing is that it happens before the mind consciously have time to react. So for behavioral analysts, these small movements can reveal very specific moments of emotional tension. Imagine an interrogation. A stranger responds calmly to several questions. His posture appears relaxed. His voice is stable and his behavior seems normal. Sin embargo, at the time, the researcher mentions a specific name or a specific event changes something. The angel's hand moves towards his neck. Maybe just for a second. Perhaps almost imperceptibly. But for a trained observer, this gesture is a clear sign that question activated an emotional reaction. This does not automatically mean that the person is lying. This is a common mistake that many films have popularized the language. Body does not function as a lie detector. Continues. What it really reveals is psychological stress. And stress can occur for many reasons. Guilt, fear, discomfort, social pressure, or even simple nervousness. That is why the experts never interpret an isolated signal. Always look for patterns. If a person answers a difficult question and at the same time diverts the gaze, touches its neck and adjusts its body posture, then we are observing a stress cluster of different signals pointing to the same emotional state. And the more consistent the pattern, more reliable is the reading. But what is really interesting is that this type of behavior does not appear only in police interrogations. Constantly in everyday life, in job interviews, in negotiations, in uncomfortable conversations, in discussions, even in social situations. Apparently normal, for example. Imagine that during a conversation, you mention an unknown topic. Perhaps a recent mistake, a financial problem, or a controversial decision. The other person responds calmly. But immediately afterwards it is touched. The neck or fits close near that area. Your answer may sound calm, but his body has just revealed that this question produced an emotional reaction. For experts in human behavior, this type of signals are extremely valuable because they reveal points of psychological stress. And points of psychological tension are usually where the truth is found, however.
This ability should not
Not used to manipulate or judge persons. On the contrary, the true value of understanding these signals is in better understanding others. Because when you start to notice these gestures, you also begin to realize something deeper. All human beings, we share the same basic stress reactions: pressure and radiation. Our brain continues to operate with the mechanisms that we developed thousands of years ago, and that connects us more than we imagine. Coincidentally, this observation has a direct echo in Stoic philosophy. The Stoics understood very well that human emotions are natural responses, are not defects or weaknesses, are simply expressions of the body and mind. Events around the world. What really defines to a person, according to the Stoics, is not the initial emotion he experiences, but the way he decides to respond to it. Marco Aurelio wrote something that fits perfectly with this idea. You have no power over external events, but on your mind. In other words, stress may occur, discomfort may arise, emotions can manifest themselves, but the real force is in the ability to maintain control about our actions. And here is an interesting lesson that many professional negotiators also apply. When you are aware of your own body signals, you can start controlling them. If you know that touching your neck reveals stress, you can train to avoid it. If you know that he moves his arms, it transmits discomfort. You can maintain an open posture. Over time, this body discipline has a surprising effect. Your presence becomes more stable, quieter and more difficult to read. In a way, it is similar to what happens in poker. Professional. The best players don't just watch others, also carefully control their own finances. The goal is not to hide emotions, but to prevent these emotions from dominate behavior. And the same idea has been taught by the Stoics for centuries. Inner discipline, the ability to remain calm, even when the environment tries to upset you. When you combine this philosophy with the modern understanding of human behavior, something interesting happens. You stop reacting impulsively. You begin to observe. You begin to understand. You start to see the dynamics, invisible, that occur in every human interaction. But there is still one more step to go, because so far we have talked about signs, individual, feet, body blockages, and self-calm gestures. However, the FBI guys use these signals within a much broader method, a method that allows you to read a complete room in a matter of seconds. And when you learn that protocol, your way of observing people changes forever. If you are enjoying this type of content, profound on human psychology, behavior, and practical philosophy, be sure to subscribe to Stoic Foundation. This channel is designed for people who want to understand human nature, strengthen your mind, and develop a clearer view of the world. And the best is to come, because in the next part, you will learn the complete protocol used by some behavioral analysts to read a room in less than 5 seconds. An ability that can be completely changed, the way you interact with people. Now that you know the 3 main signs, feet, body blockage, and neck signal, you are ready to apply everything within a professional protocol. The FBI leaves nothing to chance. Their training is based on observing and analyze every detail of human behavior. In a matter of seconds, This is neither magic nor is a methodical system. The first step is called initial scan. As soon as you enter a room, without saying a single word, your goal is to observe before the FBI interacts. Teaches its agents to note the general position of the people, the orientation of your feet, and the way they interact with objects around you. Even in a meeting full of failures, patterns emerge naturally. Then comes the baseline reading. Each person has a habitual behavior, a normal state that can be identified if you pay enough attention. For example, someone can routinely cross their arms, look the other way, or play with a pen. This normal behavior becomes your reference. Any deviation will be significant. In other words, first you observe normality, and then be able to detect the exceptional. The next step is to search for signal clusters. A single gesture can be, but when several signs point in the same direction, interpretation becomes reliable. Feet pointing outward, torso slightly turned, and the neck touching indicates a clear state of discomfort or sadness. On the contrary, feet pointing at you. Relaxed arms and open gestures suggest interest and openness in these clusters. Are the key to reading fast and accurate behavior. Then enter the intention and comfort analysis. The FBI classifies signals into 3 categories: comfort, discomfort, and intention. Observes how people seek to create closeness or distance, how they interact with their environment, and how they respond to your presence. This step requires patience and concentration. It's not just about looking, but to perceive patterns that speak beyond words. Finally, there is the contextual interpretation. No signal exists in isolation. Is always analyzed in relation to the situation, the group, and the person. Someone crosses their arms because it is cold, or because he is uncomfortable with the conversation. A gesture of self-calm on the neck indicates a lie, or only momentary tension. The answer lies in observing clusters and baseline changes. The real power is not in memorizing gestures, but to integrate them to read the full context. This is where the philosophy Stoic provides a perfect complement to the Stoics. Taught that we cannot control what others do. But yes, we can control our interpretation and reaction. By applying the FBI protocol, you do not seek to manipulate. You seek to observe without judgment and act clearly, understanding reality as it is. Marco Aurelio recalled that the correct perception is the basis of action. When you combine accurate observation with internal serenity, silent control is obtained. About any interaction, the most important learning of this protocol, it is double to read others accurately and control your own presence, while your body remains open and relaxed. Your clear and unprejudiced mind, people behave more authentically. A silent effect of influence is generated, not because you force someone to act, but because your stability projects clarity and authority without words. And there lies the true power of a professional observer, inspired by both the FBI method, as in Stoic philosophy, understanding reality and acting from virtue. Throughout this video, we have explored how feet reveal intention, how body blockage indicates discomfort, and how gestures of self-calm on the neck reflect stress or emotional tension. Each of these signals is a small fragment of the silent language of the human body, and together they form a powerful system. To understand people, no need for words. The FBI protocol teaches us that observation and pattern analysis are essential It is not a matter of memorizing gestures or looking for lies, but of perceiving emotional truth behind the actions. Each signal cluster gives us accurate information about what someone feels or thinks, allowing us to adjust our interaction strategically and ethically. However, the reading of human behavior is not limited to detecting weaknesses or Stoic philosophy adds a crucial dimension. Control of our own mind and body. Marco Aurelio, Epictetus, and Seneca taught that although we cannot control what others do, we can always control our interpretation of the facts and our emotional response. This principle is combined perfectly with the FBI method. Accurately observe, stay calm, and act with virtue. Control our own signals. Not only does it make us more difficult to read, but also projects authority and security. A relaxed body, open posture, and constant breathing generate an effect that makes that others behave more authentically. Thus, the reading of human behavior becomes an exercise in self-control and observation and deep understanding. Finally, the link between FBI observation techniques and Stoic principles offer us a real advantage. In everyday life, allows us to read conversations, meetings, and social situations with clarity, recognize intentions and emotions, without depending on words and action. From inner serenity, virtue, Stoic and precision of professional analysis complement each other. The observer becomes someone who lives in reality, not in the illusion, capable of perceiving people's truth and respond intelligently. Ethics and efficiency. In applying these principles, we understand that the real force is not in manipulating others, but in understanding them and at the same time master our own behavior. That balance between external perception and internal control is the core of practical wisdom. See the invisible, correctly interpret and act from virtue, and it is this combination, the one that turns any person into a true master of human observation. Subscribe and activate the bell for more psychology videos, practical philosophy and social skills.